very much, Julian, and good morning to all of you. It's a very exciting and scary sort of moment in my career. I just really want to sort of thank some people who come. Firstly, Nick and the National Trust for giving us such a fantastic venue. Julie, thanks for making it come. John, where's John? John Pollard. Hi. Yeah. Tony, I haven't met yet. Who also sits on the Wellbeing Board. Obviously, Judith and Chris also from the LEP and the Health and Wellbeing Board. So we've got a really good group of people here, and Andrew May from the Isles of Scilly as well has come over as well, because we're Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, which you mustn't forget. So a really good group of people here. So thank you very much for coming. Really, what I want to do sort of for the next 25 sort of minutes or so is just share with you some of the sort of observations I've made in the first few months here as the sort of the chair of this really important group, but also draw on some of the observations I'm making in those various roles I currently hold and have had in the past, sort of really bringing it all together. We've only had one meeting as a board, so what you're really hearing are sort of my views. There's probably a couple of board members going, oh, I didn't know we were doing that. I didn't know about that. I'm not sure about that. So sort of taking the spirit of sort of initial views, and we've got a board meeting next week and that board meeting set throughout the year, so over time you'll see that turn into a very clear board opinion, board actions and board thoughts. So that's pretty much where we are. I sort of called this rather fun. If you're in the world of sustainability, we've gone from environment, CSR, sustainable development, and a lot of people are now talking about natural capital. And some of you will know that very well, some of you might think, yeah, I'm not quite sure what that's about. And I'm sort of just playing on the sort of the phrase here. Why don't we make Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly the natural capital of the UK as a sort of a provocation? I'm sort of using that as a play on the phrase natural capital, as I say, a lot of us have heard already. Yeah. So my first job is, with great delight, is to actually just sort of recognise and list the board. Here are all the names. Maybe Trevor, people just here. Trevor, Stephen, Kevin, Edwina, Esther, Peter, Gaz, who unfortunately can't make it today, Judy, Tony, and Matthew. So you can see where they come from, you know their surnames. So a really interesting mixture of organisational representation, years of expertise from different sectors. So I think you'll see there we've got a really exciting board to work with, and I'm really looking forward to sort of opening up, having those discussions, having those arguments, and having those massive agreements, and really sort of pulling what we think we can offer to help make Cornwall a great place to live, and what we can offer for Chris's and other people's agendas. I thought this was really interesting. I was going for a walk in Perranporth where I live, and I walked past the newsagents, and this was actually the newsagent sort of sandwich board outside the shop. And it's actually based on a piece of work which actually is a lot more detailed than that. But what an interesting headline to sort of see only this weekend. You know, Cornwall, the happiest place in the country. Yeah. And in a way, you know, we know that. And one of the guiding principles, you know, I've inherited, it's in our plans, and it's in other plans, it's in Chris's plans. This phrase, you know, the culture, community's environment remains special and unique. And that's talking about Cornwall. So one is sort of the official words we've used, and that's how it's sort of occurring and being seen in the national media and the local media. And I think it's a very powerful thing to be very proud of, that actually a survey done outside Cornwall, up and down the whole country, is producing headlines like that. Loads of debates about how you do those numbers, what they really mean. But what a great place to start. Yeah? And whatever we do, we've got to build and preserve that. And also, this has been, you know, one of the things I've been told, and Peter was telling me this, you know, you, Cornwall, have invested a lot of thinking and creative thinking and a lot of expertise to pull this together. You know, this Pursuit of Excellence work, which was held for several years, lectures, publications. But, you know, the idea of Cornwall's heritage, its natural environment, all actually contribute to making Cornwall a very special place. You know. What an amazing sort of palette to start from. And actually it's surfacing itself into many, many reports, many, many plans. Yeah? But maybe some people are saying, yeah, actually, I have too many plans. Yeah, bit of a problem here. But what this is saying to me is actually a lot of the granular detail, a lot of the really technical thinking, a lot of the best ideas have already been published and captured. Okay, well, might as well go home. Yeah, there you go, you've done it. You don't need me. It's done. You don't need the board, you know. So we're doing some really, really, really important thinking. And whatever we do, we've got to acknowledge this work. We've got to pull it together. Therefore, one of the things I'm sort of getting to in my own mind, perhaps we don't want the 7th report on the next slide. Do we need another plan? Yeah? And my first boss when I was working at B&Q, which was part of the Kingfisher Group, said, don't forget, Alan, too many plans can be no plan. Yeah? And I'm not saying that those plans are no plans, but sometimes the most important thing is consolidating all that thinking into a single piece of work. Yeah? What can we do to convert some of those plans into delivery? You know, some people say the plans are great, but not actually everything is happening. Why not? What are the institutional barriers to making what's a really important and good idea not actually happening? One thing I would say, as somebody who's worked all my life professionally, I've worked outside Cornwall. You know, and one of the things I'm very sensitive to, are we using some of the best thinking? Ecosystem services, natural capital. There's some really interesting work going out there, circular economics. You know, interesting concepts which are driven to actually create better economic outcomes, but the knowledge and the thinking is being drawn from the sustainability world and even the traditional environmental world. There's some really important things here. To what extent do those plans join up? If we cut and pasted all those paragraphs into one bigger report, would there be paragraphs actually contradicting themselves? You know, and that's sometimes why too many plans ends up being no plan. Is there a joined upness? Yeah. And do the people who really need to use that plan actually have access to it? Do they understand it? Do they have the right skills and awareness to actually say that paragraph is a really good paragraph and whatever I do I must make sure that paragraph happens? So are they reaching the people who can influence the outcomes that report is looking for? And so whilst we will talk about the traditional environmental issues, I'm really interested in this sort of how do we make these things really happen? Yeah. And the other thing as well, which we know, it's almost patronising for me to say it, but it's important in presentations like this to make the point. The natural environment is the supply chain for tourism, farming, surfing, and all those other sorts of economies and businesses we depend on. If you track the supply chain ultimately down, it ends up in the natural environment. So in a way, our natural environment is our economic assets. And I'm starting to use the phrase, and you'll see it in my talk, I'm starting to talk about natural assets. How we look after the natural assets of Cornwall. Yeah? You know, Chris's lot and people have been talking a lot about a brand Cornwall, what it is. I'm not quite sure what it is, and Chris's team are doing a lot of work redefining what brand Cornwall is, but we know it's going to include something from nature. I think we can guess that already, that the natural bit will come through whatever brand we want to sort of shape Cornwall around. Yeah? And this is reflected in external thinking. You know, I made that point about external thinking. This was a big report done by somebody who looked at the entire global ecosystem through the lens of economics. And what they're really trying to work out here is, what does that natural system give our economy for free? How much would we have to spend to replace it? Or how much would we have to, or how much income do we derive from it? You know, and the figures shocked people. Coastal wetlands actually provide to the Indonesian coast the equivalent of $200,000 per hectare. And the point it's making there, if you chop down that coastal wetland to build a shrimp farm, that shrimp farm might only bring in $50,000 per hectare. But you've lost all that coastal defence, you're going to have to replace it, and it's going to cost that sort of money. Now the science and the way you do these numbers is, can you imagine how controversial it is? But what an interesting way of looking at natural resources. This is how much it will cost us to replace. And people have done it with bees, the bee problem in the UK. How much would it cost us to replace bees? I'm not sure we can replace bees. Yeah. But how much they bring to our economy. This is where some of the good outside thinking could really shape our thinking. And this stage takes it one stage further. What this slide is saying here, small print here, is the value of wood in a forest in Thailand brings in $1,000 per hectare. They've now worked out, however, that if you looked at all the other services like flood protection, it brings in $21,000 per hectare. Yeah?
The total value of wood for the global economy is 0.4 trillion, but to spend the cost of carbon abatement of those forests is 3.7 million. So it's looking at all the other things we derive from the environment and how much is it actually worth. How much of these sorts of numbers do we have for Cornwall? But this is what it's boiled down to. When you summarise that into a sort of a catchphrase, a metaphor, for every dollar exchanged in the cash economy in the world, nature is giving us another dollar for free. Therefore, the logic is, and that's why I think the sort of the LEP, LMP sort of juxtaposition is really interesting. We need to look after that, and we need to grow that, and we need to make it work. But in order to do that, we need to look after the other half of the equation. Yeah. That's where the sort of the laser thinking is going. And I think we can apply that to a lot of the decisions we want. We don't want to be a nuisance to the economic growth of Cornwall. We want to help the economic growth of Cornwall by actually giving them the best data to make the best decisions. But it extends to health and well-being. I was at a conference at the King's Fund in London only last week, where they did a study on the benefits of sending children who had sort of depression problems, behavioural problems, to work on a farm or in a conservation project, rather than drugs and clinics. Not only did the people get better, it was actually £7,500 per year cheaper to give them that treatment than the more conventional clinical medicine. And we're seeing it on the news a lot about outdoor space, access to outdoor space for children, Project Wild Thing, all these sort of things are all saying, this makes sense. This is a better quality of life, and it's saving money. And so it goes straight into the well-being agenda. You know, just how much is that headline worth for Cornwall? Why do people move to Cornwall? It's the underlying things which allows that headline to actually appear in the Perranporth shop window. So a lot of this is about the quality of life. And businesses are on the same journey. Now, I'm not a conservationist. My training, my career has always been working in business. And my first major role was helping B&Q unpick this challenge. 1990, selling a lot of timber products, and they didn't know where they were coming from. At the same time, tropical rainforests were being trashed. And so the messaging was very simple. You are chopping down the rainforest, B&Q, because you're buying tropical timber without any control, discipline, or rigour. 20 years later, it's a very different story. All their timber is certified by third-party standard setters, third-party verification, and they know where every single square inch of timber comes from, down to forest level. A completely different business model had to be created to drive that. But the most important thing, I think, was B&Q was involved in creating the standards and the governance system of third-party standard setting. What was really interesting in this room is a photograph of one of 400 meetings in 40 countries to agree 3 sides of standards of forestry. What I think is very interesting about this for me is who's in this photograph. This person could have been the representative of indigenous tribes in Peru. This could have been the buyer for timber from B&Q's biggest competitor. That could be a manufacturer. The standards were co-created by the environment, social and economic sector together. They didn't campaign against each other. Of course, they had arguments during these meetings, as you would, as with such a diverse set of values. But it was co-creation. We're now moving from campaigning to collaboration to now even co-creation. And that's why the environmental movement defend the FSC as much as B&Q defends it. What would be the equivalent in Cornwall? Really sort of interesting way of agreeing the answers to complex issues. So we're moving ourselves from collaboration to co-creation. And what's happened with the timber trade, they've got better economic outcomes, better environmental outcomes, and even well-being outcomes. And we saw this with the forestry debate, where this has crept into public policy. Do you remember about 2 or 3 years ago where Cameron declared they were going to sell off the UK forest estate and put it into private hands, yeah? And everybody complained. What was going on here? Well, they reversed their decision because the public outcry was so much, and the Bishop of Liverpool was asked to chair a committee to review what had happened and what to do next, and I was lucky enough to be one of those people. What happened was, the narrative which led to the decision to sell off the UK forest estates was a £20 million loss to the UK economy. Because how much the timber was bringing in versus how much it cost to look after it. But what the public were reacting to, that £20 million loss equates to a 37p extra on their tax bill. And And what they were saying is, I don't mind paying 37p for somewhere to walk my dog for the whole year. That's good value for money. And all you had there was a purely economic decision versus a social well-being sort of decision. Now, there's a really interesting way of how the paradigm is shifting and how people look at the same asset through very, very different lenses. So the 70s, 80s narrative was very much about protecting the environment from business. Save the ozone layer, save the world, save the rainforest. That led to B&Q's journey. Yeah? In the 1990s, we talked a lot about the triple bottom line. The economy, society, environment. Yeah? And that moved the debate forward. I'm not criticising it. It was a very clever way of moving the debate forward. Yeah? But both of these assume silos. There's a whole bit of world out there, there's another bit of world out there, there's another bit of world out there. Yeah? And we've got to make them work together there. What we're now recognising is actually this sort of systems thinking. Yeah? That nature isn't siloed, it's a complete system, and it's systems within systems within systems, with negative and positive feedback loops, etc., etc. And of course, we know everywhere around the world, but particularly in Cornwall, we're part of that system. And one of the things we've got to really understand better is we don't actually know how that system works. We don't really know how soil works. We don't really know how the weather works. Therefore, we have to be careful when we tinker it. Yeah? If I opened up the back of my laptop and played with it because it wasn't working, and I don't understand how my laptop works, you would get very cross with me. And that's why we're going to be very careful when we open up the planet and tinker with it. We don't quite know when it works, but at the same time we know how much economic value it's giving us. Yeah? But also every system has a finite limit. And where the debate's really going now with the sort of the sustainable consumption agenda is actually recognising the system we rely on has a finite limit. And if everybody had the lifestyle the typical person in Cornwall enjoys, if all 7 billion people on the planet today had our lifestyle, we would be using 3 planets worth of natural resources. And think what's happening in China and India with their race to the middle classes. The numbers don't add up. And so this is where environment and economics and well-being have got to work together. And there's 9 billion people coming by 2050. And this is why. Yeah? 20,000 litres of water to make 1 kilo of coffee when you look at the whole supply chain. 5,000 litres of water to make 1 kilo of cheese. Now these numbers might not be true for the products being made in Cornwall. These are averages made around the world by sort of bespoke studies. But it just shows you how we've got to work businesses in a different way to actually create better economic and environmental outcomes for everybody. Yeah? We need to create a one-planet economy. Yeah? That means the way we made that lifestyle in the past will be different to how we make it in the future. And what you're hearing a lot now is this concept of new business models. Yeah? Who said this? We need to radically redesign our business models with less emphasis on growth and more on well-being. There's some crazy academic at some university, some mad environmental campaigner who we can ignore. Ian Cheshire, who runs B&Q and Kingfisher. Really interesting things are happening here. And he's saying the numbers don't add up. The way I supplied B&Qs last year won't be the way I'm going to supply those 100 B&Qs I want in China. Because the numbers aren't there. We need to change so many different aspects of our business model. Yeah. Management consultants are beginning to think the same way. This report was sponsored by business in the community who I work for, Accenture and Marks and Spencer. It's called Fortune Favours the Brave. And what they're doing here is they're working out how these new sort of business models, how much they're worth. And what they're saying is if we adopted more sustainable business models, that would bring in another 100 billion to the UK economy. Not this is how much it will cost in order to protect the environment. This is what it's worth. This is where the extra growth could come from if we adopted new business models. Zipcar. The average car does about 4% work in its lifestyle. What Zipcars are saying is don't buy a car, just buy the hours you actually need it. And Zipcars are obviously getting 60, 70, 80% usage for the same resource. That's where that 3-planet economy to the 1-planet economy is possible. Loads of behaviour change, loads of status issues, but a very different model, business model, thriving, buy shares in Zipcar by actually reducing consumption. Ian Cheshire now has something called Street Club, where he's encouraging customers not to buy tools, but to lend each other tools. Because he knows that he's worked out, and he's very embarrassed, that that power tool will do only 2 minutes work before it's thrown away. You drill a hole in the wall, put it in the garage for a year, and then throw it away because there's a new sexy one in B&Q. That's fine, that's got Kingfisher where it is now, but that's not going to supply 9 billion people with that type of lifestyle. So he's encouraging new business models to make it possible. Swapping. Is it just a clever PR gimmick where Marks & Spencer's are encouraging people to recycle their clothes? Well, it is great PR, absolutely. But what they're trying to do is transform a linear supply chain, grow it, wear it, throw it, into a circular supply chain. Behind the scenes, there's universities making loads of money, getting the science together to develop the technology to recycle clothes. There's loads of businesses prospering to work out how they're actually going to recycle these clothes. It means clothes manufacturers getting closer to the UK because you don't want to send clothes all these back to China. Yeah, some really good economics here by doing the right thing. Richard Branson, being Richard Branson, takes it one stage further. His circular economics is, can I take CO2 out of thin air and turn it back into fuel? There are scientists out there who can now turn CO2 in the sky back into jet fuel. Economics says no, but the science says yes. Really interesting. Universities are getting 10, 15 million pound grants to develop this technology. Yeah? Really, there's a guy who's made a business worth 10 million in 1 year who makes plastic bottles made out of CO2 taken out of thin air. Negative carbon. Really interesting work happening here. We all worry about how much CO2, carbon, farming puts into the system. And that really worries us. And if we ever had a carbon tax on farming, it would be really annoying and really undermine our competitiveness. There are people who argue that you can raise cows in a certain way, which actually takes CO2 out of the air and locks it up in the soil. So you can have carbon negative beef. And thousands of hectares in Africa and Australia are claiming that they can do this. Some scientists say it's brilliant, some scientists say, oh, I'm really not sure. Yeah, science is a bit like that. But what a really interesting, healthy debate to have. Universities are getting loads of money to really test this. Farmers are doing it and are believing in it. Well, some are. What's our view on it? Would it work for Cornwall? You know, new ways of doing the same thing. Localism. The chief executive of Asda said the biggest, fastest, most... If local food was a brand in Asda, it would be the fastest growing brand in Asda. Localism is really important. Look how Tesco's promoted it at the country show. Things are changing. Yeah, the weather is changing. Whether or not it's climate change caused by man or not, we know we're going to have more floods. Did you know that between 40 and 90% of businesses in America where they have this data don't recover from a disaster? We also know we're going to have more floods. Yeah? But we also know we're going to have less money for flood defence. And the best flood defence is nature. United Utilities up north now restore peat bogs to actually capture water to prevent flooding rather than spending the money building concrete. There are different ways of using nature to deliver what engineering in the past supplied in order to keep businesses open to recover as opposed to closing down after floods. This is a leadership agenda. This isn't about detailed stuff, this is about leadership. And so what I'm thinking is, who are the most influential people in Cornwall? How much exposure have they had to this type of thinking? What would it take for us to actually just spend some time with them? Seeing is believing, a safe space to have these conversations. So what I'm really thinking about, maybe the role of the LNP isn't to add to the pile of plans. It's to actually provide access to this type of thinking, test it, prove it, win the arguments, make it accessible to Cornwall. Yeah? Influence the best use of what we already know. There's fantastic work being done in Cornwall for Cornwall. I've seen the reports. Can we get it to be used at a greater level? Where is the safe space for somebody to sit down with an expert on circular economics and say, so what is this holistic farming all about? It sounds like bonkers science. Well, actually, here's a demonstration project. It could work if we did it this way. How do we test this new thinking? And how do we get into a co-creation space? How do we move away from environment versus economics to one plan where both work in harmony with each other? So I'm really beginning to think now about what would we do if we had the 100 most influential people in Cornwall. And by influential, I just don't mean the powerful. Because 100 most influential people should probably reach some of the grassroots people. Chairman of the local LAG, working at grassroots level, but would actually be in that room. So this isn't going to cut out grassroots if we find the right 100 people to be in that type of conversation. Yeah. Do we have one single place where we know what the natural environment is worth to Cornwall? And do we believe that data? And do the people who would use that data know how to use it? Surfing is worth £64 million, we say, in our literature. Surfers Against Sewage are going to actually publish a report which actually says it's a lot more than that. Which does two things for me. One, why do we have so many different numbers for the same exam question? And what are the underlying values which actually answers that question? But do we know that information? Do policy makers, decision makers, have a place where they can get that information? And do they understand how to use that information if it was provided? I think it'd be really powerful to the LNP not to hone that information, but to pull it together and find the right institutional home to use it, and for the right people to use it, and understand why they should use it. Yeah? But it's not just about literature issues. I talked about systems. In a way, that's the space. What is the best use of every hectare in Cornwall? What is the right way of using that bit of pen width, which actually grows its environmental assets and grows the economy? Where do we have that exploration? Where do we have that discussion? Yeah. But through things like the ESI, we have some of the leading thinking on this type of thinking in our own county. So can we use that thinking? Yeah, to make decisions within our own county. Yeah. You know, the real issue here is people have different values and what they need from that square piece of land. So how do we create the space for that argument to be had to get the best outcome for Cornwall? A safe space for conversation with the most influential. Don't worry, I'm not sure if I really mean 100, if it's 132. Yeah, you get my point. It's all about co-creation. What really matters isn't these three silos, but it's that bit in the middle. That's true sustainable development. Yeah, one vision, one plan, one narrative, and with the elected council, council officials, and the three boards, what a really good place to start. And then replicate that with the Isles of Scilly in the way the Isles of Scilly most want to do that. Yeah. Then it's interesting, the maths is interesting. If those 100 people could talk to the 100 people they influence, that's 10,000 people. If those 10,000 then had a way of talking to another 50 people, that's already at 500,000. Now I know it's not that simple, I'm not that naive, but it does show you how quickly the right ideas could get down across the whole of Cornwall to get everybody to believe in this. We're small enough to get this message to everybody if we influence the right people with the right messaging in the right way. Yeah? Not easy, but arguments aren't easy either, are they? Yeah? So what the Local Elected Partnership is about, and this is where the partnership work comes in. Clearly some work with the top 100, but get the traditional environmental groups together to come up with one voice. What would we say as one group? How do we have one narrative to share with other people? How can we share and improve that narrative by sharing it with the council, the officials, the LEP, the Health and Wellbeing Board, yeah? And then of course the Isle of Wight. How do we get into this co-creation space? And then of course we've got other people we can work with, local action groups, the catchment partnerships, and of course other LMPs. We already had the first meeting with all the LMP chairs in the South West to see where we should have a common narrative and where we have to be individualistic because of where we are. So I'm coming to the end now, so this is where my thinking, and we'll have the discussion with the board next week, but this is what is surfacing from the conversations I've been having with individual members of the board and other people, where I think we can have most benefit. Rather than write our own plan, we should find ways of getting access to shape and influence the other people's plans to help them get better outcomes for their plans. Okay. The inventory of natural assets, improve the quality of information we have in Cornwall, apply that at a spatial level, work with others to co-create a vision. Why not? What's that vision? What's Cornwall do we want in 2050? Yeah? I've already talked about the top 100, but this isn't a space for arguments. It's a space for coaching, conversation, and also recognising those 100 people who are actually really getting this agenda and making a difference. Maybe we do need new tools. Our own quality of life scorecard, people talk about it. What one would we want for Cornwall? Would it actually help inform Proof projects, trailblazing, using some of the monies which are available out there to demonstrate holistic farming, anaerobic digestion, all those sorts of issues we know have a contribution to make, but we're not quite using them. Yeah? And finally, a place to celebrate. I'm bored with environment being a pain in the arse. It's our most important asset. So let's really work that and use it. Yeah? So the commitment I really bring as the chair of the board, and hopefully my board will understand this and get behind this, is to provide quality information to help those with influence make the best choices they can. Not just for their silo, but for Cornwall. That's where we've got to get. It's about quality information and the use of that information. Yeah? The heritage, I haven't really talked about, but absolutely key. And when you go on the heritage tours, people say, we started the Industrial Revolution. Yeah? So a lot of the good things about modern lifestyle started because of tin mining. Yeah? We should celebrate that, we're proud of that, that's why we're World Heritage Site. Yeah? We're now in a new paradigm. Those numbers, the ways we did it in the past don't quite add up anymore because there's 7 billion people wanting that lifestyle we helped create. So we're now at the verge of the next industrial revolution, which is not decoupling ourselves from nature, but recoupling ourselves with nature in order to have the one planet economy. We're going not just from economic growth, but to environmental growth in order to drive a growing economy. If we started the last industrial revolution, perhaps we could start the next one. Because that's what we're recognised for around the world for doing. So that's a really powerful point to really think about the contribution we can make, not just to Cornwall, but to these issues which every region in the world is facing up to. This isn't our problem, this is a global problem, but we've got a unique set of circumstances where we can make a really important difference to those big external debates. Yeah? And that's why I started my talk really talking about Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly as the next region of the UK, if not the world. So thank you for listening. So that's where my head is at the moment. So that's really my sort of first thoughts, which over time will turn into a